Episode 5 starts off with Diane crossing the desert after being expelled from Lake Labyrinthodont by Kai. This is where the perspective kind of shifts from Diane being an antagonist towards Kai to her being a character we actually follow somewhat. We see her fight off Hatchet and Machete, who actually gets named this time. We then get a quick scene featuring a saurophagon axe. Now I'm sure you're asking, don't you mean Allosaurus anax? No in this case, because of what I say here. This is a very interesting species. For years it was debated whether or not the genus was distinct from Allosaurus. It is in Prehistoric Valley, but it is still unknown whether they were like this in the Jurassic, or became distinct through the phenomenon of TED. In light of the recent discoveries about saurophagonax in real life, we now know that the creature we refer to as saurophagonax here is in fact a creature that evolved within PV from Allosaurus. This also means that Sally is not a saurophagonax, as she was one of the original individuals to come through the rift. Regardless, the real purpose of this scene is to confirm that Rosa and Atlas are now mates. Nothing much more to say here. We then move on to probably my favourite part of Series 2, and perhaps PV in general, the return of Serration. Before we get to that, I would just like to quickly reveal a couple of things. The footage showing the ground bare of vegetation was taken but a few metres from the clearing where I filmed almost all the forest scenes for Series 2 and 3. The footage actually had to be slowed down because I stupidly didn't take a long enough clip. The next thing to reveal is that Terence feeding from Gigabyte's carcass is actually a reference to an old KikiZilla 101 series called Kiki Quest. In one of the episodes, he talks about the potential for partial omnivory in Triceratops, and I decided to incorporate that into PV as a result. Now on to Serration. As I've said before, I'm kinda surprised no one really noticed her absence for the entire series so far, but it is explained here when Terence has a narrow escape from her. This is, of course, Serration. After leaving this territory to find a mate, she has returned to find Gigabyte dead and the ecosystem in turmoil. We then get to the climax of the episode, and arguably the season, Serration vs Thorn. While this is only the penultimate episode, the final is largely just wrapping up loose ends and setting up Series 3, more of an epilogue than an episode, to be honest. First, however, I quickly wanted to drive home just how vicious Thorn can be before he dies, by showing him destroying his rival's clutch of eggs. While I don't doubt that this is a pretty normal thing for trike herd leaders to do in the PV universe, I do think it helps to make Thorn just that little bit more unlikable from a human viewer's perspective. It also gave me an excuse to show Frost again, where he scavenges the remains of the eggs. Serration then shows up, but doesn't attack, showing that she isn't just strong, but cunning as well, not openly attacking the heavily defended herd. Thorn, however, doesn't hold back. I do personally really like the fact that it was Thorn's aggression, the thing that got him control over the herd, that ultimately did him in. Interestingly enough, although Serration beat Thorn, whereas Gigabyte died trying, Gigabyte is actually a bit larger, at least the figure that plays him is. The Carnegie Giga may be around the same length, but that's only because of the curves in his neck and tail. If they were in the same pose, I'm pretty sure Gigabyte would be both taller and longer than Serration. With that, on to episode 6. Episode 6, as mentioned before, is mostly just tying up loose ends, while also setting up the existence of Bruce and Diane being in the Northern Marshes for Series 3. I also have a bit of behind the scenes footage to share here, once again taken by my mum. Another secret to quickly point out is that this scene here, this shot of the Borealis Pelter, wasn't originally for this episode. This was intended to be in the Gigabyte special, which I was already working on at the time, but it ended up here because I just needed a shot of some foliage and a herbivore to show that the ecosystem is recovering. Anyway, this is also the last time the Triceratops herd really play a major role in a scene. I've been asked before what happens to them after Series 2. Basically, they're still around, but now that the local predators have learned how to hunt them, and since their population is limited to one herd, they aren't nearly as damaging to the ecosystem, having become integrated into it. They will also probably die out in time due to inbreeding, unless the rift allows more Triceratops through, which, to be fair, could happen. Although, given that I haven't really done anything with them since Series 2, I kind of wish at times that I had killed them off entirely. Moving to the eastern prairies, we get a quick scene introducing Mango. Nothing much more to say here. We then get onto our final sort of epilogue scene, where we get to see Ceration building a nest and Frost make a very minor cameo, and that's pretty much the episode. We also get to see something that barely happened since Series 1, a shadow being in shot. Because I film on a phone with a rather small screen, I didn't notice this until the editing stage. So yeah, great big shadow of me ruining the atmosphere of the episode. And so on that bombshell, and shameless Top Gear reference, goodbye!